Good evening, and welcome to Lincoln Theater. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Christina Belknap, and I am the executive director here, and I am so glad to see so many of you for our second talk in our new series, Talking Aquaculture in Maine. Tonight we are focusing on women on the water, and I wanted to just take a quick moment to thank our partner in this, the Island Institute. They have worked with us in collaboration as well as being a sponsor. And also another sponsor is the Shuck Station. Out in the lobby, we have a table that has a lot of information about the Island Institute, their membership program. There's a menu from the Shuck Station, so you can take a look and see what everybody is offering, the important things that are going on in the community. If you are already a member of either Lincoln Theater or Institute, thank you so much for being here and supporting both organizations. And if you're interested, there's information in the lobby for both of those, so I encourage you to take a look at that as you head out the door this evening. And with that, I am so pleased tonight. Our host is a Community Development Officer here from Island Institute, Molly Miller.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us tonight. The last time I was talking to a group this big about aquaculture, it was an undergrad marine policy class. Half of them were on their phones, and the other half were there because I took attendance. So I appreciate you all willingly showing up to hear our conversation. We have some great panelists. I'm going to introduce one of them so she can talk a bit about a trailer about a movie they've worked on, which you're about to see. This is Afton Vigue. Afton holds a BS in Ecology and Environmental Science and an MS in Natural Resource Economics from the University of Maine. After joining Maine Aquaculture Association in 2019, Afton built a fresh digital presence and brand identity for the association and led the development of key industry marketing and communication tools, including the Maine Oyster Trail. In her current role, she develops and manages MAA's marketing and communication strategies, including traditional PR as well as digital and social media campaigns. She works closely with the MAA Board of Directors as well as growers across the state to keep them activated and engaged around issues that matter most to them. And she participates on several aquaculture-related boards and working groups at the state, national, and international levels. So if you could help me welcome Afton, she'll introduce her film.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming tonight. I am just going to do a quick introduction for you. We're going to watch a trailer for A Sea Change, which is a short documentary style film. We premiered it this year on Earth Day, and it's not available to view online yet, but we're doing some summer screenings, and I wanted to let you know it's going to be playing at the Waldo on August 1st, along with some other events that are coming up this summer. Be sure to sign up on our newsletter on our website, maineaqua.org, to stay in touch with all the upcoming events and film screenings that we have. The film is about the women who are driving Maine's farmed seaweed sector and just about their lives and their role and their experiences. So please enjoy the trailer.
I always joke that I've always wanted to be a seaweed farmer since I was a kid, because nobody has ever dreamt that.
So many young kids leave, they just leave. And I did the same thing. I didn't see that there was a reason for me to stay in Maine until I learned about seaweed, and then it brought me back, funny enough.
For me, there's a difference between a job and a career. All of our careers are gone. Unique careers.
Absolutely. There's the potential for it to fill this gap.
There's a huge need. I look at it like we're helping another family be able to stay in our area and not move away, like so many others have.
We have a huge opportunity here on the coast. How can we take this tremendous asset we have, which is cold, clean water of Maine, and more coastline than the state of California?
If I can contribute to the environment and food in a really positive way, I'll consider myself to be really, really lucky.
I would love to see small towns like yours be able to sustain itself without becoming reliant on the tourism industry.
It seems like seaweed has such a potential to be an income source for people to actually live in these coastal communities.
Hopefully, like, this conversation and what we're all doing on the water can show people it's not scary, because it's not. It's changed to continue to be who we are.
Okay, so we'll hear a little bit more about those impressive women as well during this talk. Our next panelist is Fiona de Koning. Fiona and her husband Theo moved to MDI from the Netherlands about 18 years ago to continue the Dutch style of mussel farming that the de Koning family had been doing since the late 1700s. Thank you. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Fiona since 2010.
Something like that. A nice long time.
So 2 of their 3 children have joined the family business as the 6th generation to carry on this tradition. While mussels are their primary species, they've expanded into oyster aquaculture as an economic diversification in the face of a changing climate. So thank you,
Hello,
Fiona.
everybody.
And our third panelist is Jacqueline Robidoux from Maine Sea Grant. She's a part of the Marine Extension team. Jacqueline focuses on the development of the seaweed sector in Maine with an emphasis on sustainable production, post-harvest processing, and product development. Her work provides support for coastal communities through outreach education, technology transfer programs, and by coordinating stakeholders around Maine's seaweed resources. Jacqueline's background in technical seaweed aquaculture research helps to link ongoing applied research with industry capacity and opportunities to foster robust and sustainable working waterfronts along Maine's coast. Thank you, Jacqueline. Okay, let's get to it, everyone. So, our first question for all of you, so if one of you feels moved to speak, please do so and we'll go around. What inspired you to start a career in aquaculture, and can you tell us a little bit about your story?
I'll go first. So I grew up in a lobstering family in Tennant's Harbor. Many generations of commercial fishermen and women in our family. And to me, I was looking for a career in Maine. I wanted to work in sustainable food systems. I had pursued that type of area of study in undergraduate and then stayed on to study some more in grad school. And when I finished my graduate program, I kind of stumbled upon aquaculture. I didn't have a background in it. I didn't know anything about it. I knew that there were some oyster farms in the Damariscotta River. That was pretty much the extent of my knowledge. And so I thought this is a really cool opportunity and a new way to make a living on the water and a new kind of burgeoning sector. And I was really interested in learning more about it. And I took the job with the MAA about 4 years ago, and I've been doing that ever since and just absolutely love it. I think we're really lucky to work with so many amazing people who are out there every day, and they're incredibly hardworking and creative and just entrepreneurial and really changing the game. And that every day motivates me to do what I do.
Thank you.
Me?
Yes, please.
Well, I sort of married into it. Although I grew up on the water, I've been sailing since I was a baby, sailed dinghies on my own when I was 6 years old. My parents are fanatical sailors, but not here. As you can hear, I have the worst Maine accent in the coast. I am a naturalized American citizen, but I'm working really hard on sounding like one. I've been here 18 years and it's not going so well, but everything else is going well, just not the accent part of it. So my husband is a 5th generation mussel farmer, so his family have been farming mussels in the Netherlands since the 1700s. There's probably since before then, but the records only really started about then, and that's because then they only got organized and started making records because they started having like arguments between neighbors, and nothing's changed. things don't change over the time. So they got more organized, they started to actually farm them on farm sites, and gradually the techniques have developed. They haven't changed a huge amount, but it's continued to improve, and they've studied it more, but that's how we've come into it. Back in 2004, I believe, we were looking at, he feels really strongly that you shouldn't just coast along on the generations that have gone before you. This is a generational business, And he felt that you should be adding something and not just live on the hard work of your grandfather and father before you. So, but the Netherlands is really tiny. I don't know if anybody's visited the Netherlands. It's a beautiful country. I loved it, but unfortunately it's rather small, and it's a third of the size of Maine, and it has like 22 million people in it. So, and a tiny little bit of coastline. So the opportunities to grow seafood were pretty much maxed out. And so we were looking at starting a farm somewhere else. And we were very fortunate to find Maine and see that there wasn't the sort of farming we do, which is bottom culture mussel farming, so not on ropes, but actually on the seabed. Hadn't been done here, so it was a bit of an experiment, but we came over here with our 3 children back in 2004-5, and started with just the family. It was a bit of a long, a long process, but now we have 15 people working full time, and we are the biggest mussel farm in the state of Maine, and it has been a really, really wonderful place to raise a family. And our 2 boys are now working with us. There's now 6 generations of moving along. There's a lot more to say, but I'll stop there.
I love it. We can get back into that. Yeah. Okay. Jacqueline, do you want to go?
Yeah, so this question reminded me of a conversation I was recently having with my mom, who informed me that my elementary school career aspiration was to be a farmer princess. What that looks like, I don't know, but I guess is indicative of, like, you know, always being drawn to farms and food and monarchies, I suppose. But and so I guess that was something that I am not from Maine. I grew up visiting Maine in the summer and was always very drawn to it, and always felt like this was a place that felt like home for me. I went to school for marine biology and thought I might study, like, I don't know, sharks or cuttlefish or something a little bit obscure. And then turns out the most obscure thing for me was seaweed. And that was when I took a seaweed class at UNH. I was just really drawn to that. Started cooking up seaweed in my dorm room. And I think my roommates at the time were like, okay, we know we're poor college students, but we didn't know it was this bad. And it was just kind of a really unique experience. I got to work really closely with a professor who was an expert in seaweed and still is. And once I took this job with Maine Sea Grant, I got to work more, like, less in the lab and more on the people side of things. And my ideas about what aquaculture was, which had previously been very focused on, like, the technical and the lab and the science side, totally transformed to become something that's much more, like, people-centric. And I got to work with all sorts of different types of folks in the seaweed and aquaculture space generally. So it's been really fun.
Thank you. I didn't know all of that. Okay, can we talk about the most rewarding aspect of your work for each of you?
You were first, so you're up again.
Yes, I think it's funny because when I went in for my job interview, I asked that question to my boss now, and I said, you know, what motivates you every day? And he said, the farmers. And in a job, so we're a nonprofit trade association. We do advocacy, business planning support, and outreach and communications on behalf of farmers who are members of our association. We represent the full diversity of the sector, so finfish, shellfish, and sea vegetable producers in Maine, land-based and marine-based. And it was very clear to me from the start that, you know, the farmers really do guide the association, and we spend so much time working directly with them, whether they're in our office, whether we're on the farm, whether we're talking to them on Zoom, on the phone. We really are there every day to serve them and support them because they're extremely busy, and frankly, they need to be out farming. That's where they want to be. That's where their heart is. That's where their soul is. That's where their, you know, income, frankly, is, where they can support their families. So for me, the most rewarding part is also, I have to say, just working for the farmers. And we have an amazing board, amazing members. Just everyone in this sector is so driven, and it makes me motivated every day to work hard for them because I know they're out there working, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, putting everything that they have into these operations for a dream, really, that they all have. So, you know, that's really rewarding. And just knowing that my work has a direct impact on their livelihood. You know, I think when I was in the academic world, working on my undergrad and then my master's degree, I just felt very like, what does this research mean? Where's it gonna go? It's just gonna sit on a shelf somewhere and no one's gonna pick it up. And I felt really kind of just lost and not necessarily extremely passionate about it. But that's what motivates me every day, is knowing that at least somebody can benefit from the work that I'm doing, and there's going to be something on the other side for someone else, and I'm not just staring at a screen. Yeah.
Thank you. Fiona?
Same question?
Yes, please.
The most rewarding?
Or several.
It's a really tough one, that, about the most rewarding. It's a wonderful place to be able to live and earn a living. But I think for me, there are so many rewarding parts of the journey that we've been on. When you're a farmer, it's a journey of, you have your family, you have children you're raising, all the things that go on with raising a family and trying to develop a farm and mixing a farm in and learning about your community and listening to people with their opinions about what you're doing, but also really being passionate about growing food, growing sustainable, clean, delicious food in the waters of Maine, which, trust me, this is a globally excellent place to be growing seafood. The flavors that you get from these waters are just phenomenally good, where all the seafood that comes out of Maine, whether it's wild harvested or farmed, is just absolutely top class. And so coming here and having the privilege to be allowed to be starting a business here with my family and to grow that, and to be able to support other farmers whilst they're going through that process, and be able to serve in your local town, but I also serve at state level, to be able to bring the perspectives that we've learned from things over the history of the farming background that we have, hoping that we won't make the same mistakes. I guess people will always make mistakes, but perhaps not the same ones. So we can share that and learn from it, and it's always innovative and moving. There's never a day's the same. There have been moments where it's, you know, it's cold, for example. It can get really cold in Maine in February, and we have a product that is a year-round supply, so we keep going in that time. So a rewarding part is I'm much more resilient. I'm super resilient now than I used to be, which is really a good thing to have too. So it's been a fantastic experience. The time has gone by in a flash, and I've still got much more to do. I wish I had 3 lifetimes to be able to carry on doing all the things that we're doing. I'll stop now because, again, I'll keep going otherwise. Jacqueline needs to say something.
We'll return.
Most rewarding?
Yeah.
Okay, I would say for myself, one of the most rewarding things in my position is the diversity of people that I get to work with. So Sea Grant is a state and federal partnership through NOAA, and we're housed at the university. But then our real goal is to kind of be the boots on the ground for issues and opportunities that face the Maine coast, and aquaculture is one of them. And so getting to work with the farmers, the scientists, the researchers, the development organizations, filmmakers, classrooms, teachers, you know, you name it, across the board. And there are people in there who are all different ages and come from all different backgrounds is really exciting. And then I think particularly for the seaweed space right now, because it is a growing opportunity for the state, I get to kind of like dream with people. I know that might sound a little cheesy, but I get a lot of calls from folks who want to start an operation or are just like generally excited about seaweed and about what their role in this sector could look like as it pertains to that. I mean, you guys just saw some of the amazing women who are doing incredible things here, and so being involved in those conversations and getting to work with folks like that is really probably, I would say, the most rewarding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this next question is originally for Fiona, but I'm curious what the two of you have to say, so think about this. How has running a family business impacted the way you operate your farm? And for the two of you working with family businesses, how does that affect the way you interact with them?
how do you talk about your family in front of all these people? They've been cherubs, all of them. What can I say? It's been brilliant, actually. I would actually recommend it to everybody. Of course, there are moments where it's family. So how has it impacted how I run it? I expect an awful lot from my family. I expect them to show the kind of leadership that I would expect. They do everything that they're asking anybody else to do, but there's also a level of compassion as well. They also, because they can do everything that they're asking everyone else to do, they understand. And I think that perhaps as women, that level of sensitivity, I don't mean, that's probably sounds sexist actually, but you know, there's a level of compassion for the work can be really hard. And we're all doing it, whether it's in the processing part and getting the packing done, or there's always a time pressure when you're dealing with a live product, which shellfish are. So to get them all ready at the best quality possible, to get them out there so that people can taste Maine when they get the product delivered, that takes a family. And as a woman, yes, you tend to be the glue that holds the family together. And so it changes it in that way, but I think that they equally apply the same sorts of rules. Maybe that's more of well, how do families do it rather than how does a woman in the family? Because it's multiple people doing it that way.
Thank you. It's amazing what the family has done. If any of you know Hollander and de Koning seafood, it's child labour, really. You may see some of the pictures. We've got little ones down here who are holding bags of mussels. So they just teach them young to be very knowledgeable.
They pay taxes at 12. Did you know you can do that with your own kids? You are allowed to, and they are wanting to do it. That's the trick, women. Make them want to do it.
They're all professionals at an early age.
They are. I'm playing with you. I wouldn't force them to do it. I also managed to tell them that it's a privilege and an opportunity that they're having to work really hard and pay taxes at 12.
That is a parenting win.
That's a parenting trick.
Yeah. Thank you. And Jacqueline and Afton, when you work with farmers who either want their farm to be a multi-generational thing going forward or already is, does it feel like weightier to you, or is there a pressure, or is there something you feel like you need to deliver when you're thinking like, oh, they're talking about wanting this to be successful for like the next generation and the next generation? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think, well, I have a couple of thoughts. First, how it changes the way I interact with them. I would say, especially if I'm dealing with a farmer or working with a farmer who has young children, I always try to listen first before saying anything, because I don't know what's going on in their world. I don't have kids. I can only imagine how difficult that is. But I think taking that time to really listen and try our best to serve their needs and hear what they're going through. At the end of the day, a lot of what we do is kind of like customer service, right? Picking up the phone when there's a crisis, when something's going wrong, when there's a lease hearing coming up, whatever it is, trying to be a good listening ear and supportive. The other thing I would say is I want to tell their story. So I love working with family businesses, family farms. I come from a family that has, seafood industry in our blood. So for me, as a storyteller, as a creative person, I always want to find opportunities to showcase what they're doing, whether that's going out to the farm and shooting some video content, or getting some media coverage, if that's something that they'd be interested in. Doing some of that creative storytelling and really putting their face at the forefront of what we do. That's really important to me because as a communicator, I think one of the best things that we can do in Maine aquaculture specifically is storytelling and empathy building through those stories. So helping people to connect. It's not just a bunch of floating gear in the water. Like, that's somebody's life. That's their legacy potentially. So that's really, I think, that's what I think about when I talk to family-owned businesses. I'm like, okay, so how can we, maybe they're not ready for it yet, but I'm coming. I'm coming
She's
for you.
She's always got an ask somewhere. And she does a really good job with it.
After I listen, right?
Yes, she does.
And I would say, I think working, we try and work with folks all across the state, and this is a very community-oriented sector, and the family aspect becomes so clear and really emulates that in many ways. I can think of times where we're like out on a farm doing a research project, and the parent and child are also participating in that research. And getting excited about their future there, or sometimes it brings a really human aspect to the work that we do, which sometimes applied research and technical support can sound really stuffy until you see like a 14-year-old out there talking about how like oysters are going to fund their college. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Okay, and this is to go back to you, Fiona. What role do you see your daughter-in-law or granddaughters playing in your family business in the future? I mean, clearly they're working at a young age.
Yes. Yeah, they're working. But they've been working, I mean, this is the whole thing, they've grown up here. So the kids have gone through school, and now they've got children, and they're just about to start school. So they're not quite big enough for the picking line yet, although I've got a box. I'm working on this box that they can stand up on. But they're already doing little things. They're already taking on roles. My daughter-in-law she's moved into managing to run the sales and distribution part, which means that she can combine that with raising two little girls. So she can work from the home office. So that the flexibility of a family-run business, she works really hard. She's very good at her job, but because it's a family business, you can give her the flexibility of being able to do it from the home without having to be in the building office. She can, if the children are sick, she can still work from home if necessary, or there somebody else to step in. It's very different when you're all part. It's like it takes a village to raise a child anyway. Well, it really does. And so trying to run the business, you can help each other fill those roles because you can spread across the roles. Everybody can fill in for somebody else. So how do I see them doing it? I can see them taking over. I mean, that's the next stage, just not too soon and not too much so that it overwhelms them, because there's a lot to it and it's a lot of work, but it's like you help each other until you get, how we were talking earlier about you need to train. Things can be rather frightening. I wouldn't put her up here facing all these beautiful people right now, because that would take a lot of training to do that. But she will be to the point where she'll be able to do that, because she'll be able to do it with confidence, and that takes a little bit of training. And particularly for women in the sector, it can be harder sometimes to do that.
Sorry, this is just a follow-up for you though. How did you handle that coming into a new country, to a woman in the industry?
Three with that accent. Is she going to mention the accent?
No, I was leaving that out. Okay. I think that's a plus, because
no, it
it's
isn't.
A lovely sound.
Not in Down East Maine. It is not a plus. It is not a plus. Yeah, I'm a woman. I'm from not just away. I'm from a different country, and I don't speak right.
You're from very away.
I'm very, very, very far away. You deal with it the same as you deal with all these other things. If you're going to bring yourself into somewhere so beautiful as this, where people have done things for generations in the same way, you listen. First of all, you go out, meet the people in place. You don't expect them to come to you, and you listen, and you don't tell them what to do. You listen. So I mean, it's like with everything else. You don't order people around. You go and listen to different perspectives, and you try and be respectful. And you try and understand what has gone beforehand. The communications part is critical. It's so important, and it's mostly listening. Communications people sometimes think of as talking at people, and it's not. It's listening to, asking questions, and listening to what the responses are.
Thank you. I love that. I'm going to go back a little bit, because I'm curious, for the aquaculture industry, each of you came in kind of different places in time. And I myself came in at a little bit different time. I did my PhD at the University of Maine. I started in 2015 when aquaculture, while there had been many businesses that had been going steadily, there was quite a boom in smaller aquaculture farms. And so I was looking at challenges and opportunities in the aquaculture industry at that time when it was growing very quickly. And that for sure kind of, changed my perspective of how I looked at everything and just my awareness of the industry. So I'm wondering, for your points in time when you got involved, what have been the big changes?
I can jump in on this one with seaweed, because when I started my grad school research was about 7 or 8 years ago, and then started this position with Maine Sea Grant about 5 years ago. At that time, we had maybe 4 commercial seaweed farms in the state, and they were very small, and we didn't have anyone who processed farmed kelp in or put it into products or got it in front of people in a way that you'd want to eat it. And over the past 5 years, that's dramatically changed, where we have about 40 farms, we have processors, we have marketing professionals. Maine Seaweed is making it into markets that it has not before in the ways that it is you currently see it. And so we've seen just a dramatic transformation in the industry. I think also with the excitement around seaweed has come a lot of conversations about climate. You're seeing seaweed aquaculture reflected in the Maine Won't Wait climate plan. So that was something that 4 years ago, or even 5 years ago, was not a reality for the state and is now. So that's pretty exciting.
Can I just keep going with this for a second? So now that there is this, more awareness and appetite for seaweed aquaculture, when people want to develop a business in seaweed aquaculture, what do you tell them? You're going to have so much demand, this is great. What do they need to know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, where do we begin on this one? But I like that you said appetite, because that makes it sound like a thing you might be interested in doing and eating. I think the first thing to know is that all of the photos that you might see behind you of beautiful, sunny seaweed days are a lie. They're all a lie. It is not really like that. And I think that is,
marketing. That's marketing.
Yeah, that is one small sliver of what it looks like to be a seaweed farm and a seaweed farmer. That is the best day. And there are many other days that fill out that calendar. So I end up having a lot of conversations with folks about this happens in the winter. It's a winter crop out on the water. So if you maybe have never been on the water in the winter or experienced that, it's not a romantic thing. It is actually difficult to dangerous depending. And so having to have sometimes hard conversations, because there's a lot of buzz around seaweed. I see it in the news. I get a lot of calls from people who want to start farms. And sometimes those conversations end with you would be a great candidate because you have a background as a lobsterman, or your family has worked in a marine industry for a really long time, or you have that experience. And sometimes it's maybe let's think about the ways that you can get involved in seaweed that aren't being a farmer, and encouraging folks to think creatively about, do you have marketing experience? Or do you know how to create food products? Do you know how to develop small businesses? These are all emerging needs for the seaweed space right now. And so, that's not to say that if you have dreams of becoming a seaweed farmer, it's impossible, but it's a lot of managing folks' expectations.
What do you think is the biggest expectation maybe that people have that is either something they really need to reconsider or holds true? Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest expectation, at least that I kind of hear, is I'm gonna become a millionaire on seaweed. If anyone has evidence of that, please speak now. It's a slow burn, and it's something that is a diversification strategy for most folks. Almost no one is a full-time seaweed farmer. The folks who are farming seaweed have many other jobs and other things that they do. They wear many hats. So seaweed is something that is an addition for their business, but not necessarily, in a lot of cases, their entire business, unless they're involved in processing and involved in product development and involved in marketing that. So Yeah. Yeah,
Thank
probably
you.
the
I
$1
think
million.
I might be responsible for some of that marketing stuff, so apologies.
It's good. The marketing, it's really good. It's just that there's such excitement about it because it is a really cool, unique thing for the state. And there, you know, it's tough to be the person that's like, you know, don't start a farm, or maybe like think about starting a farm before you jump all the way in. But it's a really necessary conversation to have with folks because we want to make sure that as we grow this sector, we do it in a way that is right and is safe for folks as well.
Thank you. And how has it evolved for you, Fiona?
What was the question
Taking
again?
a step back, how has the industry evolved since you first started?
I think steadily and strategically are two words I think I would use. In the beginning, when we first came, there weren't seaweed farms. There weren't a lot of very small scale farmers. There were quite a few farmers who farming oysters and mussels, but not, and they are just steadily growing and doing their stewardship work as they're doing it, and there are more people interested in it. And I think some of the drive for that has come from the positive eco-services aspect that comes from the aquaculture work, and that has driven the energy and the enthusiasm of people wanting to do it, and that's really good. I mean, I think some people are keen to mitigate some of the problems we're having with the climate change. Climate change has been driving some of the changes we've had to do. We're also having to adapt what we do because the change out there is rapid, and we're having to adapt to it. And a lot of for example, we have diversified into growing oysters as well, because oysters can tolerate warmer water than mussels can. Mussels seem to be doing fine still, but we need to know how to grow something else if that becomes a problem further down the line, if we have a generational company, plus all the people who are depending on us to continue with their careers in aquaculture. So that is changing. With any kind of farming, the timeline, the horizons are always further out than they are with many businesses. I mean, it's not a 7 years and then you're out of the business, you can sell it and move on. It's not like that. People have to look at it and think, how am I going to do this over a much longer time? Because it takes a long time to learn what you do. You should do it carefully. And a year is nothing to learn something. You can try something and think, okay, now I've got this. And then the world will change a little bit. And you look at it and say, well, what happened this time? And then you've got to adapt and try something again. And every time you change one treatment idea or something on the farm, then you have to often give it a growing season before you can see whether that's changed made any difference or not. So it's a slow process because it's a natural process, and therefore things do change. Over the 18 years, things have changed in physically in our area. Spawn cycles are different, but a lot of that's from the climate, from the industry. Are you wanting more about how the industry's changed, or how physically it's changed on the farm? Everything, she says. Everything. Okay. Well, from a physical side, we have seen lots of species that are unusual on our farms. We had a triggerfish on our oyster farm. And I'm not a biologist, but they're not supposed to be up here, right? They're not, are they? They're supposed to be down in the warmer waters, certainly the other side of Cape Cod, and so that was a bit of a shock. We have the spawn cycles of the shellfish themselves. The mussels, they used to be pretty predictable, pretty regular. We could count on when we would get a seed set. That's just all over the place. So we're having to change how we are doing things in order to manage our own farm cycles. So that has taken a lot of thought process and research and global studies and all sorts of things. So that has been a big change. So just trying to keep up with that has been big. Also, the encouraging and the mentoring of small farmers. I mean, we have been around long enough that we are able to offer help and expertise. If it's the helping with the policy You know, I'm a board member of the MAA as well, but so we try to offer help with leasing questions or sanitation and processing questions, those sorts of things, where if people have questions that we are able to help them with, we can do those sorts of things. There are more people interested in it, but it's also trying to answer a lot of people's expectations, but also some misinformation. Like that you get information and suddenly it's a hot subject and everything gets blown out of proportion, and a lot of strange ideas come out, and you have to sort of bring it all back down and quieten it down again and say, look, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is how we've always done it. If the change is there, it's going to be much slower than that. So don't panic, but help us work on this. But suddenly people get frightened because climate change is frightening, and it is. So it's managing not just expectations, but people's fear of change. And obviously when you're in a farm and you're farming in a public space, we share these waters with other people. And so therefore there's the responsibility there, and that's part of what we do.
Because of the trial and error and learning curve associated with farming, I mean, we have so many small farmers right now. Do you encourage people interested in oyster mussel farming to start out at a small scale before they get into it? Or because I know there's an amount of scalability to make it profitable.
Right, there's an economy of scale that depends on a lot of things, not just scale. So it depends on species and type of what you're growing in, that sort of thing. Do I encourage people to start small? It depends on what they're growing, how they're growing it, where they're growing it, and what their level of expertise is. So it's not really a question you can answer like that. I would encourage people to know what they're doing. Would be good. And not come from Norway, but that's just a personal thing. Sorry, I'm going to be in trouble for that. Can you scratch that you heard that, please?
Afton's mouth opens.
I'll be in trouble. That was a flippant remark for which I deeply apologise in case there's anybody from Norway here. It's not a personal thing about Norway. It's about a salmon farm that was a terrible proposal, which has now gone away, and we're fine. So if anybody just explaining that was an in-house joke, but it wasn't a good one, and I apologise. I didn't mean to be nasty to anybody from Norway. I love Norway. Stop digging.
I won't keep asking.
Okay.
I won't pepper more.
Don't ask me about that one.
But I will, based on your face, Afton, I will direct it to you now.
I'm in trouble now.
But for you, how it's evolved and how that's made your job either easier, harder. How does that change your job?
Yeah, so about 4 years ago when I first started, I would say awareness around aquaculture in Maine was lower. I think people are more aware of it. I think there's a lot more interest now, especially among young professionals who are coming out of the universities or moving to Maine and looking to start new careers. I think COVID accelerated that. As we know, lots of people moved to Maine for many reasons, but I've seen a lot of kind of new energy and ideas and excitement around aquaculture that when I first started, I had no idea this was really even here. And then I posted a job April 1st this year for the position that I was hired for, and I got almost 30 applicants, and I was shocked. I couldn't believe that many people wanted to work in aquaculture, and many of them were young, many of them had a couple years experience, and I know that when I applied, they didn't get that many applicants. So just over the past 4 years, I think there's just a lot more interest, especially in southern Maine and Portland. There's a lot of young people who are working in raw bars, and then they're meeting farmers, and they're going out and they're learning about, there's a big farm to table connection there, especially for oyster farming in particular. So there's a lot of excitement around that. And I think it's really good. I'd love to have a larger pool of people to work with, and our applicant pool was very competitive, so that was great. And I'm just happy to see that people are recognizing it as an option for a career on the coast of Maine, and that it's not all kind of just doom and gloom, because as we know, there's a lot of challenges that the coastal economy is facing, including climate change and gentrification, regulatory changes. The coast of Maine is just changing extremely rapidly, and that's nothing new. I mean, that's been happening, but I think over the course of the last couple of years, really with COVID, we've seen some really dramatic changes, demographic changes on the coast. that the property value is really astronomical. I mean, I worry that one of the challenges the aquaculture industry really has to reckon with is workforce housing, and being able to live in these coastal communities, start businesses, working on the water is very, very hard. I mean, I couldn't buy a house on the coast of Maine. I moved inland, so I've been priced out of my hometown. My husband's been priced out of his hometown on the coast as well. So that's probably one of the biggest changes I've seen, is just the acceleration of the gentrification. But new people moving to Maine is good too. So we need new energy. We need young people. We need people to go into the workforce. Our problem is that we're aging to the point where we're now the oldest workforce in the country. So
she wasn't talking about you.
Oh, thank you. We've just had this internally, like, you know, there's a little bit of difference in age here. But if I can bring a little, add on to something to that, because something I've also noticed is the number of career type jobs. These are not just seafood processing manual labor jobs. There are a lot more companies like ours, but others as well, that are offering career paths for people coming in, or through working their way up. It doesn't have to be all clever clogs like you three. You can have people coming in. I have a high school student who interned with us in her summertime, and now she's coming to work at a full-time at a good starting wage, but then she can work her way through, and I'm hoping that she will become farm manager on Oyster Farm, so that we can keep people and young people in good jobs that can afford to have a family and can afford to stay in our area. And those sorts of jobs were less available in aquaculture when we first came here. It was much more manual labor jobs, which a lot of things still are. I'm not a big fan of manual labor because it hurts after you've been standing. I know you're laughing, but it's many hours on a picking line. I've done it. I wouldn't want anybody to have to do that for years and years and years without being breaking. I think you're condemning people to physical harm if you have to do that for a long time. So I think the innovations and development of how to do this better, more ergonomically, use people for what people are good at, which they're good at a lot of things that machines aren't. But there is if a machine can do it well, why wouldn't you have a machine able to help the people doing it? So those sorts of developments should be applauded as well, because they're helping to protect your people for the long term as well. And we want people long term in aquaculture. It's a long term kind of business.
Jacqueline and Afton, since you have gotten into the industry relatively recently, what do you say, or in your marketing and advertising, like what do you think about when you want to attract young people into aquaculture? And maybe for you, like talking about seaweed or selling it, you know, like what do you think about, or do you think about, how can we get young people into this industry?
Well, I think a lot of young people are worried about their future because of the climate. And to me, aquaculture represents a green job. And people want to feel like, especially young people, like their job is making a positive impact on the planet. And I think aquaculture is a really easy sell in that regard, because it's low impact protein. It's something that you can do where you can feel good about it. You get to work outside. A lot of people who are environmentally conscious like that aspect. The other thing is for families, for young people who grew up in the coastal communities in Maine, it's another way to work on the water and continue on in a tradition that has been in their family for a long time, and to kind of hedge against climate change, and to have a diversity of different fisheries that they're working in. So it kind of depends on who I'm talking to, I guess, and where they're coming from and what their interest is. But generally those two kind of talking points is what I would fall back on.
And do you talk to a lot of, say, younger fishermen who want to get into some type of aquaculture as a diversification, just hedging their bets for their, future career?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of interest in the last year or so. There have been a lot of things in the news around the lobster industry, as everyone knows. There's been definitely heightened interest in the last year or so. Jacqueline could talk more about this, but the Aquaculture and Shared Waters training program that we've been running with Sea Grant for 10 years, there were over half the students came from the commercial fisheries this year. So there were almost 100 of them, total students. So it's definitely top of mind for people, especially the younger folks. And I just always encourage people to explore it. I think especially seaweed, because it's winter crop and it's sort of something you can add on, whereas oyster farming I think is more involved, more of a year-round thing. So yeah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, when I work with folks who are younger, like, I will try and understand like what it is that they're interested in doing. So for example, like if I meet someone who says, I really want to start a kelp farm, I will frequently try and find like a mentor for them. I think like mentorship goes a long way, because you can't just give them that experience, and taking them out on a boat once to see a kelp farm is helpful, but that's not the full picture. And so trying to find mentors, or then also encouraging them to use the skills that they have that others might not. You know, I can think of one business in particular where some of the younger staff run the website and they do the social media and they do marketing. And I think that's stuff that sometimes folks might like overlook and roll their eyes at and say like, I don't need that fancy, you know, Instagram account. But it is a way to make sales, and it is a way to get your business name out there. And so those are skills that sometimes folks who are younger and coming into the industry have to contribute that are not always, you don't see the same level of ability sometimes with folks who have been here for a long time and just never needed to make a website or never really wanted to.
Fiona, for your business, I mean, you mentioned the young woman right out of high school and your own children starting at a very young age. How did you, I mean, it sounds like maybe your children kept that interest themselves, but how do you...
We didn't actually force them. In fact, I made them ask to come in. I mean,
right. But how did you know, how do you keep their interest, and did you find the need to really have like a mentor type person for, you know, for each of those young people to really develop their sense of how they want to be involved? Or
I think that's just probably a role that I probably fill. It's you see the interests and the skills that they have and the aptitudes that they have. There's always work that needs to be done. You fit the people to do what they feel the most fulfilling and that they can do well, so they get the success, enjoy it, and then everybody's pulling their weight and everything gets done. It works out pretty well that way, just as long as you're not too regimented about it. It's getting that buy-in. It's like it's persuading and enabling and encouraging rather than dominating and structure. And I mean, there are certain things that have to happen on any farm, of course, and then we all have to take our share of the stuff where the record keeping and things. But it's interesting what you said about the skipping to the technology. I have a husband who's a little bit old-fashioned like that, so he's still in the writing things down in a book phase. Well, there's a really cool piece of software now that you can actually get all that record straight onto a cell phone. So we've just sidelined him, and we've got the farm manager now who just does it. He's like, I'm sorry, if you can't keep up, sweetie, then, you know, you may be clever, but if you can't keep up with the times, we need this because it's much more efficient. But it means that everybody else can do it and everybody can share the information, and it's not just in the head of the very wise, clever, multi-generational farmer. But now we can all learn, and the data's there, and those sorts of things are changing, which makes it more equitable across, you know, it's also more efficient. So, you know, apart from everything else, you all understand it a bit better. But that is an important thing. Cell phones are really useful, but they drop them in the ocean sometimes.
Insurance
helps. Yeah.
For attracting younger people, as we were talking about, I mean, part of that is outreach and education that all of you kind of play a part in, but you also play a big role in raising awareness about the industry in general. And I know, Afton, you were saying that's one of the things that's changed a lot since you got into the industry.
Wages matter too.
Wages matter too, yeah.
Actually, how much you
very
pay
competitive,
them makes really important. And you can only pay good wages if you make a profit, and you can only make a profit if you reach economic viability. And so all of the good things and the warmness and all the doing it well is important, and you won't do it if you don't do that, but you have to make a profit, because otherwise you can't pay them well. Our starting wages are $25 an hour. That's what they start at.
And
thank you. Thank you.
when you guys started, at what point did you start being able to afford employing other people besides the family?
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
It took a while. Our first load of mussels, we debissed, we took all the beards out by hand. It was 300 pounds and our marriage nearly didn't make it. I nearly went back to Europe that night. We had to, so it took a while. If you're an entrepreneur, and a lot of these businesses are going to be entrepreneurial, that is no other way of doing it. The first few years are going to be hard grind because you've got to get it off the ground. And there's so much, the learning curve is steep. You're not known as an entity, your customers don't know you, your regulator doesn't know you, nobody knows who you are, so you have to prove yourself on every single facet of every part of what it takes to get a successful business. It helps perhaps if you are already embedded in your community, if you've got a good reputation in your community at least. So that may help, so that support. So it would depend really on how lucky you are as well, but also how hard you work at the beginning. But it took us a while, I think probably 5 years, I think, before we could actually start to employ people. And even then at the beginning, we didn't pay as well as we do now because we couldn't afford to. My husband he has the honor of being the worst paid member of staff that we've had ever. We paid him $1.98 an hour, we worked out, probably the first 7 years, something like that. Everybody else was paid more than him. Every single other employee was paid more than him. Yeah, it is the way it is if you're running a business, I'm afraid.
If you're committed.
Well, that's just the way it was.
No, you made it work as a family too.
It's just, that's what it takes at that time. I mean, that's if you got to live from it. We never had another job. This was it. We had to earn our money from the farm. So it's, we don't know how to do anything else really. That's the problem. Other people can do something else as well, but we couldn't. So.
You're multi-talented. You could do many things. You're versatile. But one of the things I want to touch on that you said is, so, assuming you have a good reputation in your community, that might help you.
Yeah.
I know, from when I lived on MDI, you were involved in every committee, it seemed, on the island, basically. Every group, you were always willing to.
Yeah, but that's an outreach thing. That's a civic duty part of it, and I'm not sure that I would necessarily mandate that everybody else does that. That was me. Not everybody necessarily has to do that, but I think that it helps. I think that it's it's a little bit of give back too. And also I am not from here. I had a bit of hard work to do. You know what I said about being female from away and speaking badly? That was part of trying to mitigate that.
I'm from Massachusetts.
Oh, are you? Okay, excuse her, she's from Massachusetts.
So I do understand
it's
on
nothing
some
like being from England, darling, nothing.
I know, people can't tell quite as quickly. But I live on Vinyl Haven, everyone. So it's a small island and everyone there knows I'm not from there.
Yes.
So they do know pretty quickly. But I do think, that piece of, contributing to your community, giving back.
It's also listening. That was part of to be a good functioning within your community. If you're farming in an area, you need to be part of that community. And where would you find that information out? If you didn't grow up there, you have to get involved somehow. So for me, that was on the Marine Resources Committee or the CLAM committees or whatever. That would be part of, at least I could contribute something then. So that's where I did it. But there are other people who would do it through the theatre or music societies or something that they would volunteer somewhere. You have to be giving back somewhere, probably, in my opinion, not dictating anything.
Afton, do you talk about that with your farmers at all? Just either getting involved in the community or, bringing neighbors some oysters or, meeting them and talking to them and getting to know?
Yeah, for sure. We've we've been working on a couple of programs at the MAA to involve the growers more at the local level and to empower them to be, more engaged. I think it is hard because nobody really has time, right? You have to make the time, and that's the thing. You have to prioritize it to go to those town meetings and engage with those groups, but it's super important. So I always encourage people to do that, and anytime that there's an opportunity to bring even a group of kids from school out to the farm, like that stuff goes a long way in Maine because the communities are so small, and you really need to have everyone in your corner. It's when it comes to making decisions about your livelihood, and all the farmers are really at the mercy of the state to determine whether they can have a lease in state waters. So it really helps if you have a strong community standing behind you at those hearings, vouching for you as a strong person, as good operators, as responsible people who are doing good things. So
the school outreach is really, really good, particularly our local elementary school. They come like on field trips, and we will set up like a touch tank for them, or we'll meet them on the beach and they cook mussels on a campfire, and that does a lot because they ask really intelligent, good questions. These kids, they want to know a lot, and you have to know your stuff because they'll ask you about policy, they'll ask you about climate, they'll ask you about biology, they'll ask you about all sorts of things. So you better know your stuff because otherwise you look really dumb. But those are good. Those are things that pay dividends as well because they'll go home and tell their parents about the stories, the things that they've learned. That has always been a really rewarding thing to do. I always enjoy doing that. They sign me up for that all the time because it's great. I love doing the kids stuff.
Jacqueline, do you want to talk a little bit about the education and outreach that Sea Grant does? Because I know that's, your bread and butter for an organization.
And it kind of ranges too. We do education with schools all the way up to like the program that Afton was mentioning, which is a training program for adults. And we see pretty common threads, like Fiona mentioned. Kids ask really, really intelligent and unique questions, and then they want to throw a green crab at you. So, it's in that sense, it's exciting because you kind of have to think back to like what are the basics, and it shows you kind of the questions that many people have. And sometimes I think at least education with schools, kids will ask the questions that adults might be a little afraid to because they think it might come off as stupid or whatever. So it is kind of interesting to have that full range of outreach and education around the aquaculture space.
Afton, one of the things that I mentioned in your intro was the Maine Oyster Trail, which has been an incredible way to, bring awareness and education to the industry. Can you just tell people a little bit about what that is in case they're interested themselves?
Sure. This is a project I worked on with Jacqueline, actually. It's been kicking around for a while. It's essentially a digital guide to help people find oyster farms and farmers, as well as places to buy oysters directly from the growers, raw bars and restaurants in Maine that source from Maine oyster farms, and tour operators as well. So like charter tours, like the Damascotta River cruises, for example, kayak tours of oyster farms. It's all online, fully digital, MaineOysterTrail.com. It's really fun. There's really something for everybody on there. It's kind of like a wine trail or a beer trail, but for oysters. So that's been a great project. And I think one thing we've learned from that is it's not only a secondary income stream for the growers because they get to have another sales avenue and host tours on their farm if they choose to do that. But it's also a great tool for building public support for aquaculture because it's getting people out on the farms, meeting the farmers. They're learning about aquaculture. They're bringing oysters home. Their kids are involved. Like it really, I think, has that extra benefit, and it's something that we didn't really anticipate when we built the trail. We were really just doing it as a COVID pivot strategy because the restaurants closed and farmers were trying to move product out. But we found after a couple of years of running it, just the experiences people were taking home were so rich, and that was really cool to see because we did some survey work with some of the trail goers, and there's also some prizes. So the more places you visit, the more swag you get sent in the mail. So there's a little incentive in there as well, and you can really customize your experience based on what you're interested in and where you're visiting and where you are on the coast. And yeah, it's been really fun.
I can tell you do marketing. Very good.
Everybody likes swag.
The swag was Jacqueline's idea.
Hats.
Okay,
Send them hats.
Send them hats.
you dabble in advertising as well, apparently. What about seaweed, Jacqueline?
Oh, okay. I'm rolling my eyes because trying to coordinate a tour to a kelp farm is very, very difficult. It is similar to the mussels. It's under the water unless you lift it out, which requires the farm to be there. This is also all like, the kelp harvest season is give or take a month. And that month is April. So if famously the April-May weather is not great in Maine. So even this year, I think I tried to, through this program was part of like 5 kelp farm tours and 3 of them succeeded and 1 of them had to be rescheduled. Like it is kind of by nature of it being a very seasonal product and by being something that's like wet and heavy and under the water, it's really hard to actually go see. And even if you were to, for the oyster trail, we have kayak tours. You can kayak by an oyster farm, you can see it. If you kayaked by a kelp farm, you might think it's a bunch of lobster buoys, but you would only know that it's a sea farm by the buoys on the ends that say sea farm on it, You could prospectively kayak over a kelp farm and not even know it was there really if you weren't paying too much attention.
I did learn that difficulty this spring firsthand, scheduling tours for state legislators and municipal officials, select boards. And we had some days that we were trying to do 2 tours a day. We only ever got 1 in the day. And we had to shuffle people around multiple times because of the weather. So I can't imagine.
And it's really hard for the farmer too. They have a really short harvest time. The stress is pretty high because that's when they're harvesting. And you're trying to do that extra stuff on the time when they're trying to actually get some money for all that work. It's very hard.
So if you do ever see a kelp farm, consider yourself very lucky. And I say that trying to organize a trip to see a kelp farm being harvested is like throwing a Hail Mary. Like it really is. Everything has to line up. So it's not too easy.
We're slightly warmer in April and May? Massachusetts.
How's the kelp down there?
No comment.
You wouldn't want to eat it, but I hate to do this. Can I ask you what time it is?
Yes, it's 8:15. So.
Oh my gosh! I'm so sorry, everyone. We need to take your questions. I've been talking their ears off. Yes.
I get that aquaculture that you've been talking about is around specific products, but I'm finding myself thinking, okay, there's a left coast and a right coast, and is there aquaculture there? And then the other question I have is, what do Montanans care about aquaculture? So what's the reach of the industry?
The left coast and the right coast?
East and west.
Oh, east and west. Sorry, wrong side of the pond. Got it. There is.
I can answer the coastal one. So the West Coast does have some aquaculture. There are pretty sizable shellfish farms in Washington State. They have a pretty strong presence in the intertidal. They farm a lot on the mudflats. Lots of things like clams and geoducks and oysters that need the intertidal habitat. So it's actually a pretty thriving industry in Washington State. The other western coastal states don't have a ton. Oregon has a little bit of shellfish. They're starting to get into the kelp, but it's pretty minimal. On the East Coast, it's a lot stronger. Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, very famous for oyster production. Outside Duxbury, around Massachusetts, very big production as well. Maine is small compared to the other states in terms of shellfish.
Much better.
Our footprint in terms of acres
and quality, much better.
The quality is extremely high, but the actual footprint of our farms is very small. So you could fit all the aquaculture operations in Maine side by side within the Rockland breakwater. That's how much space is taken up. So it's extremely small. It's around 1,600, 1,700 acres. So, we're definitely growing, but growing slowly. And I think one thing we have going for us in Maine is just the diversity. We have so many different species that are grown. Yeah. We have the first eel farm in the U.S., right in Waldoboro. We have people experimenting with scallops and urchins and kelp, and just the diversity is very, very cool. I think that's why people are excited about it.
And your second question was, what do people care in Montana?
Well, it's about Montana, Kansas, the flyover states. Is that a term you know, flyover states?
Thank you.
So, do they give a hoot about aquaculture?
Yes, at least my customers do. They give a hoot about where their food comes from, because they also eat farmed food, and so they often very interested about how it's grown, and so therefore they care about what we do. Yeah.
Is it in their stores? How do they get the product?
Yeah, that's. Shall I answer this? Shall I answer that one?
Yeah.
It goes into, there is a big network of food distribution in the United States, and it's basically an existing cold chain of distribution, and that's how, because we're not big farms, we tend to piggyback on existing routes that are already going into these things, and we piggyback on a lobster truck, for example, that comes down out of Beale Island, and it comes by and picks up our freight and then takes what we have, anything that's not staying in Maine, and it will go down into Boston to the big seafood hubs, where they then distribute them out onto designated trucks that go to wherever the customers are taking them from there. So we're part of the national food supply. We're just a small part of it, but we're enough that it has a presence, and Maine is sought after and can afford to ask a reasonable price for it, and that helps, of course, that helps you do it well too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Questions? Yeah, please.
I have a question about the financing. Is there money available, small business loans? Are they willing to invest? Are there other investors?
That's a good question. There is financing available. Access to capital is a challenge, though, for these small businesses. It is very costly to start a farm. You need a lot of equipment, you need a lot of gear, and it does help if you have existing infrastructure, like a boat, for example. Very costly investment. We work with institutions like the Small Business Association, Coastal Enterprises, local banks. It definitely is a challenge. There's money out there, and there's a lot of grants out there as well. SARE, Northeast SARE is another one we work with. FAME, Finance Authority of Maine. So lots of different options, but it's definitely scarce, I'd say. It's hard to come by, I think.
I think it depends upon your business plan, how well you understand the business part of it. So coming back to something I said earlier about it does really help if you know what you're doing. I think if you are not just I want to improve the climate, which we do, and not just I want to supply local food, which we do, but you also understand that you have to make a profit, because you do, then you can take that to a bank, because they are much more interested in that part of it than they are the rest. Unfortunately, that's the way it is.
Yeah, I would just add too that we have a full-time staff person dedicated to helping farmers set up business plans. So that has been great. Yeah. He's met with over 80 growers at this point, and set them up with business and production plans that they can then bring to the bank and say, this is my business plan. So,
and to back that up again to sustainable operation, that helps, so that those that do get started do a good job with it, because they're then going to be successful and do it right. If you don't get that part of it right, then it's not going to work as a farm. And if you can't finance it properly, you may cut corners. That makes sense, right? You may not be able to do it the way it should be done, because you can't afford to do it that way. So all in all, you've got to do everything properly. You've got to follow the rules. You've got to get the right permitting. You've got to get the right financing. You've got to know what you're doing. It is not easy. It really isn't easy at all, which is why we try to help people and try to explain that, but help them through that process as much as possible, because we need more people growing seafood. It's a thing that everybody wants to eat, and the more that we're not having to import from China or from Chile in frozen things, the better it's going to be for a lot of people. So it's something that just needs to be done well.
Questions, yeah.
What sort of infrastructure is necessary for towns to provide to ensure scalability of the industry?
That's a great question. What was the question? What sort of infrastructure?
What sort of infrastructure do towns need to be able to provide to ensure some level of scalability for aquaculture farms?
Shall I do it from a farm perspective?
Please
you want
do.
to do it from a...
Take it away.
Waterfront access would be the number one, in my opinion. With parking, so that you can actually leave your vehicle there whilst you're, or launch a skiff or something. Waterfront access seems to be one of the biggest issues. I think that's probably the biggest one, isn't it? It's pretty much the biggest one. And perhaps floating docks, if it's the sort of place that you can have a floating dock or a dock that you can bring a boat alongside to offload. That's always terribly useful as well. We don't have one in our area, for example, so we have to have a flatbed truck that has a crane on the back, and then a skiff which has got insulated tubs in it, that the crane at the back has to reach out over the mudflat, pick up the container, put it on the flatbed, and then we have to drive it to our processing facility. So a dock would be much nicer. Our Bar Harbour's poor, apparently. So, I like Durham, Scotland. It's much nicer down here.
I would add affordable housing. Obviously, that's a very tough one, but it's key infrastructure. You can't build a business without it. Yeah. And all the businesses in Maine are feeling it right now.
Absolutely. It's a big crunch, yes. And particularly as we want to keep our younger people, they want the opportunity to stay and work on the working waterfronts, and they can't afford, like Afton is having to move inland. We want her back on the coast where she can be more useful, which we really need her out here. So, but it's really expensive to do that, and it's hard, particularly for people young coming into it.
You could be more useful, Afton. That's what I've heard.
Yeah. Well, she's got some learning to do about the word commodity.
Yeah. I've been schooled.
She's being mentored.
Okay. Other questions? Wow. Okay. Yeah. Please.
Thanks to all the panelists. Real fast, as community members and consumers, what can we do to support not just the female entrepreneurs that are supporting aquaculture, but aquaculture as a whole for our state?
Well, you're here, which is awesome. You're showing an interest. That's really helpful. I would be engaged. So the people who are trying to do this in your area, if you can buy their product, go to the restaurant, support the local restaurants. You see, we're just the first part of the chain. Anybody who's selling seafood that's grown in Maine, that all helps. That all helps to build up that economic base. So that's really helpful. And if you are interested in how it's done, ask the questions so that you don't just comment on stuff that you haven't heard directly from somebody who knows about aquaculture. How was that for diplomatic?
Pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah, mentored.
Eat kelp, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yes, if you enjoy seafood, that's great. If you wanted to support the businesses, then the community support is really important for those who are trying to function, because they're basically they're a really good group of people. I have been overwhelmed with the collegial kind of atmosphere. It's very different from a lot of sectors where there seems to be a whole lot of competitiveness. You don't see that as much in aquaculture. Everybody knows how hard it is, and there's a lot of help between farmers. They're not competing in the marketplace. You can't get enough product out there anyway. So if you can help support the farmers' businesses by not giving them a hard time, would be great. That'd be really helpful.
You can also get involved at the state level. We're doing a lot of advocacy with the state of Maine every year during the legislative session. There are bills that come before the Marine Resources Committee and other committees that put aquaculture on the chopping block every year. It never ceases to amaze me how many threats this industry faces, but frankly, one thing we haven't talked about tonight is NIMBYism, and it's a real problem in Maine, and it's continuing to get worse. So if you support aquaculture and you want to help your local farmers, then get involved, testify, and stand up at those public hearings, because we need everyone's voices. If it's all negative, it's not going to get us anywhere. So we need the positive stories, and we need people to stand up and speak out.
Thank you.
That's the truth. The lady there.
Well, that was my question, was about the state support for aquaculture. I mean, you read a lot about the negative of aquaculture and big companies coming in to grossing. But you don't see many stories other than in the waterfront about scallop farms, or I didn't know anything about the mussel farms. So what is it that you need from the state? What is the state doing? It seems like not much. And what are ways that we can help with that?
General vocal support is really helpful, because it's a lot easier to wave a banner against something than it is to be motivated to support something, and that is really, it's hard for us as farmers to go around and rally that, because we don't want to bother you. We're trying to be just getting on with our job and doing what we're doing without disturbing the community. We're here to be just fitting in and being helpful. We don't want to be another burden on people's time. But if people felt so moved to support us that way, it would be incredibly valuable, incredibly valuable. Any farmer would appreciate it, whatever they're doing.
I think there is good support for aquaculture at the state level. I just think the challenge is there are groups in Maine that would like to slow aquaculture's growth, or make it harder to get a lease, slow down the Department of Marine Resources that issues the leases. Yeah. And so while the regulations are strong and it's very tough to get a lease, and that's a good thing, yep. It should be rigorous, it's taking 3 to 4 years to get a lease. So a lot of it boils down to bureaucracy, right? And we need to make sure that the state is well funded and that the programs have enough staff and resources to be able to process applications in a timely manner. That's a key priority for us, and continues to be a bit of a challenge, but I think we've made good progress in the last year or so, and I think things are changing.
We're still going for it. We're going to help them see how good we are. We're going to help with that process, but I've been here since about 18 years, and been singing the song of how good this sector is, and how proud we should be of how this can fit in alongside all of the things that are going on in Maine, and how good it is for fitting in alongside all the things that are going on the coast of Maine. It's changing. People are beginning to get that, and there's a lot more support for that sort of enthusiasm. So I'm not discouraged. I think that it's going in the right direction. It's just that there are, of course, the better you get at something, sometimes the opposition starts to sharpen its claws a little bit more, and so they can be louder because they're also well resourced. Better than farmers are not that well resourced all the time. So that's what we're up against. But the more support we have from normal people like us and you would be really helpful.
Okay, I am going to call it there in the sake of time. Thank you all for coming. This was the second in our series. Thank you, panelists. Well, thank you. Thank you. So we have one last one at the beginning of August that's going to be focused on aquaculture in the Damariscotta, right here, where oyster aquaculture started. And I just want to put one more plug for the film. It's August 1st?
August 1st at the Waldo.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.